right, if you want to head over to Genesis chapter 22, we will go to a familiar passage for you. And if it's not, it's okay. You get to hear it for the first time. As we go to Genesis chapter 22, we see the moment that God asks Abraham to do an unthinkable task. And I wonder if you've ever thought, is there something or is there a moment when God asks for too much? How far is too far with God? Because as we assess things at our workplace, as we assess things in school, sometimes teenagers might feel like, well, that homework assignment is just too much for me. I think I'm just going to stop here and not turn it in. I don't know if any teenagers have ever felt that. Any in here? No? Okay. You don't want to get punished by your parents, so you don't want to raise your hand. All right. But I imagine that you probably did the same thing. Those of you who have been out of school for a long time, and was there ever an assignment that you said, no, I'm just not going to do that? Or something that might be right around this time period where you might be in the workplace and your supervisor asks you to do a certain thing, and you say, I just don't feel like that's something I want to do. That's a little bit too far. Maybe in the morality standpoint of thinking, well, you're asking me to lie. I can't do that, and so therefore I cannot work here any longer. Maybe you've gotten to that point. Or maybe you're in retirement and you went to your latest doctor's appointment and they said, I want to prescribe to you another 5 different medicines. And you says, I think that's way too much. Because then all of a sudden you read all the side effects. And he says, I'll take whatever I'm dealing with over death, nausea, vomiting, all these other things. It's like, I don't think I want anything to do with it. Or if you get the wrong medicine. I heard there was a story lately about how there was a different color of pill given, and there was a response, and so a bad response. And I think at that point I said, okay, doc, that's a little bit too far. I'm not going there. I had a moment when I was in high school where, like I said this morning, I went to a Christian school. And there was this book that was given out that we were required to read. And I started reading it, and the premise was, or this man was kind of struggling. His wife had a lot of health issues, and so she wasn't able to get around as well as she used to. And then the sister comes over his wife's sister comes over to help out. And then all of a sudden in the book, you start going into how he's having thoughts about his sister-in-law. And I stopped. And I said, wait a minute. I go to a Christian school. I'm not sure that I'm supposed to be reading this. This sounds more like taking it to a level of an affair. How far is this going to go in the book? If you just keep going in the chapters and chapters, I mean, where's this going to take you? And I took it to my mother, and I said, this is what I'm reading. What do you think of this? Should I continue reading this? And she says, no way. So she went in and talked to the teacher. I loved it when Mom went and talked to the teacher for me. Do you ever like it when your parents went in and talked to the teacher for you? Yeah, in that moment, it's like, yeah, go, Mom. You stand out in the hallway. Go, Mom, right? But, in that moment, I was like, you know what? That just took it too far. I didn't think that was a step where I wanted to be putting those kind of thoughts in my head where there was a sinful situation that could have arisen in that. And when we come to this point, you say, how does this correlate? Well, when God asked Abraham to do this task, you would think that there is a morality issue here. Because God says to honor life, to uphold life. Don't take life unless there is some sort of an issue in war. That's an understood. But in this sense, here it is. He's asking him something that would be going down a road that seems to be leading to sin. You say, hold on, God, what are you doing? So how far is too far? As we get into this, we get into the unreasonable test. So we read about that in verses 1 and 2. And it says, and it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham and said unto him, Abraham, and he said, behold, here I am. And he said, take now thy son, thine only son, Isaac, whom thou lovest. You get that? He didn't just say, take your son. He's saying, take your only son, the one that's recognized in the promise, the one that you love, and get thee into the land of Moriah and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I tell thee of. Does anybody find that to be a weird ask of God? In fact, in our world today, haven't you heard of the stories where mothers have supposedly been commanded of God to go and to kill their babies? You've heard of those stories. And what happens to those mothers? They go to jail. They get taken to the psych ward. They get put in a straitjacket. I mean, there's some serious consequences to this. And so in our eyes, in our reasoning, we're thinking, wait a minute, God, this is totally unreasonable for you to be asking Abraham to do this. Here it is, the son that has been promised for 25 years has come to fruition. Abraham has followed. He circumcised his son like God had commanded him. That was the identifying factor of God's people there in the Old Testament. He was doing what God had stated. He was obeying in faith. And yet, after 25 years, and as the son is getting older, all of a sudden, God here is testing Abraham. And you say, wait a minute, I read that verse, and it said, tempted. Well, that's when we start getting confused here. Okay, so what is he doing? Is he testing or is he tempting? Well, if you look within context of Scripture, you go to James chapter 1 and verse 13, and it says, let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God. God is not one that is trying to get us to sin. And so what is God doing here? Because it seems like he is. Now, we've only taken a little bitty portion of this. We don't have the full context yet. We haven't read through the entire thing, but it says, no man can say that he's been tempted of God, for God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempteth he any man. And this would be one of those points where you say, well, wait a minute. Yes, there it is. There it is. The Word of God contradicts itself, so therefore we cannot believe it. Well, we believe that God does not lie, that he does not contradict himself, and so therefore we would have to get more context. If you were to take this out of context, then that would make sense, but it doesn't. So as we move forward, we see here that here he is, he's given him what we see as an unreasonable test. But you notice here in verse 3 that you find an unwavering faith, which is interesting because not only have we seen Abraham waver in his faith multiple times, and in fact, I was relating this to our Sunday school class this morning. I said, I love being able to work through an entire book. As we just weave ourselves through Genesis, we get to understand Abraham and Sarah a whole lot better than if we were just to pick and choose which stories we want to talk about, which time frames in his life that we want to talk about. I love being able to work through this because now we see, hey, listen, Abraham, he has messed up. He's not some perfect human being. This is not his norm. He has faith and he doesn't have faith. He has faith and he doesn't have faith. And what is that to prove to us? It proves to us that Abraham, although he has had faith multiple times throughout his life, there are moments where he falls short. And guess what? We're looking for somebody better. It's Jesus. And even in the story, we're going to get a foreshadowing of events, the substitutionary sacrifice that we're going to see here later on in this story that links to Jesus. So as we get into this moment, did God take it too far? Well, all of a sudden, he jumps up, and in verse 3, it says, and Abraham rose up early in the morning. Any of you, would you wake up early after God just asked you to sacrifice your child? Well, I think I'm going to sleep in today. In fact, I don't think I want to wake up. In fact, I got a lot of other things. What? Would you even be able to sleep the night before? And here there's just it's a tough time. I mean, I'm wrestling with this myself. Listen, when I was a kid, this didn't make sense. But now, since I'm an adult and have a son of my own, have children of my own, this really doesn't make any sense. Picture your child. Put yourself in his position. Would you have slept? And yet, he rose up early, and he got a move on. He rose up early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and clave the wood for the burnt offering, and rose up and went into the place of which God had told him. So he's following suit. He's remembering everything that's involved in here. Would you accidentally forget something? Do any of you have that problem where you're constantly forgetting something and you're having to go back home? Like in our household growing up, we lived in Awanaco. And for some odd reason, my older sister, bless her heart, she always left the straightener on, the curling iron on, something on. And Dad didn't want the house to burn down. I mean, really, would you want the house to burn down? And so therefore, we'd have to turn around and go back. You want to know why we were always late growing up? It was my sister. But you know what? In this moment, I think I would have turned the curling iron on. I would have forgotten the wood. I would have done something in this moment. And yet Abraham is just stepping up to the plate. He is grabbing everything. It says, then on the 3rd day, get that, 3 days of pondering what you have to do. How many of you struggle with your thoughts? You don't have to confess your sin here tonight, okay? Has anybody ever come to you and said, hey, listen, I need to talk to you about something? It's not like, hey, let's talk about something. I need to talk to you about something. Can we meet on Friday? 5 days from now? What are you thinking about? What's going through your head? Well, for me, because I struggle with this, what did I do wrong? How did I mess up? What did I forget? What did I say wrong from the pulpit? Right? Pastor probably watched this on live stream. What did I do? Okay? All right. And that's my thought process. That's where I go. And so if I was Abraham in this moment, I would have been sitting back saying, okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to convince my son to get up on the altar? What am I going to say to him? How am I going to walk up this mountain? How am I going to take the next step? I think I just get slower and slower and slower every single moment of traveling to where Moriah was. And so on the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar off. And Abraham said unto his young men, abide ye here with the donkey, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship and come again to you. And Abraham, did you get that? I and the lad We'll go yonder and worship and come again to you. See, Abraham has a totally different thought process here. And we're starting to get an inkling of what's going on. He's getting up, and he's going, and he's expecting for he and his son to return. Well, how is that supposed to happen if you're putting him up as a sacrifice? But he's already telling these other guys, hey, listen, just wait here for us. We'll be back. And it says, and Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it upon Isaac his son. And he took the fire in his hand and the knife, and they both of them together. I think that's interesting too. Here it is. Isaac is bearing his own sacrificial wood. He's helping this to happen. And he really doesn't even know about it. It says, and Isaac spake unto Abraham his father and said, my father. And he said, here am I, my son. And he said, behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? Confrontation. Questions. You ever get scared when your children ask you questions? What are we doing? Why? Why are we going to the doctor's office? Do I have to go? What are they going to do to me? Are they going to poke me with needles? It's like, oh, we're going to go out for ice cream. we're gonna do something fun afterwards, all right? You don't want to put that word in there afterwards. We're gonna do something fun later on, okay? And you're just trying to pass it off. If you've never been in that situation, okay, try to understand what we're going through here, okay? And this is where he's asking, where's the lamb? And Abraham said, my son, God will provide himself a lamb for the burnt offering. So they went up, both of them together. God's going to provide. And they came to a place which God had told him of, and Abraham built an altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched forth his hand, took the knife to slay his son. I'm just struggling with that. I've read over this story so many times, and I'm still struggling emotionally with this thought process. But he expects God to provide something. Some sort of substitution. There's even the thought here of in Hebrews chapter 11, verses 17 through 19, we see a little bit more into this, get a little bit more context. It says, by faith Abraham, when he was tried, offered up Isaac, and he that had received the promises offered up his only begotten son. Do you understand that language there? Does that link you to some other passage? For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. This was the promise, of whom it was said that in Isaac shall thy seed be called. God, you've promised, you've provided. We've gone through all of these unreasonable things, circumstances, just crazy road trip. This is the promise that you've offered. And yet in verse 19, accounting that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from whence also received him in a figure. And so when we get into this point and understand what's going on here, Abraham's got a thought process of, okay, God has given me this promise, and so something is going to happen where this promise continues. He will fulfill this. He will stay faithful to me. And so I will remain faithful to him. There will be a substitute, or God will raise up my son again. He has that much faith in God, and so he is ready to go. And he is ready to slay his son. And then all of a sudden you have this unexpected substitute. Totally unexpected. You have an unexpected visitor. All of a sudden, out of the blue, you go into verse 11, and it says, "And the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven." How loud do you think he called? Yeah, loud enough. Stop. Wait. Do you think Abraham was in pause mode? And just out of the blue, here it is, or what we see is out of the blue, but this was God's plan the entire time. Abraham. And his response seems so calm, cool, and collected. And in fact, this has been his response several times throughout this. Here am I. You think you'd be a little bit tense in that moment? What? What do you want? What is going on? I don't understand anything. No. Here am I. It reflects a submissive, humble attitude that Abraham has in this unwavering faith. He said, "Lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him, for now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me." And so the test was, is your son more important than God? Is the grace that God has given, let's connect it to this morning's message. Is the grace that God has given, is it teaching you? Is it in action? Are you actually seeing that it is from God? Or have you become consumed with the grace? You know, have you ever given a gift to somebody and they totally forgot who gave it to them? They're just so consumed with whatever it is. I imagine I was pretty selfish back when I was younger. I think we all were, right? I remember getting an Xbox for Christmas one year. That was a big deal. And I think I went and plugged it in immediately. And I wanted to play it for a long time because I finally got what I wanted, right? And I really didn't reflect on the giver. You know, humanity has struggled with this for all of time. Later on, God's going to give the law to be a school teacher for Israel, to be a guiding standard, a guide along the path. And as we've talked about that in Galatians, where they would often have these servants that were very invested in the children and would guide them off to school or take care of them and even have a level of authority over them that they could punish them when they were doing wrong. They were keeping them out of trouble. And this is what the law was given for. And yet in that moment, Israel totally forgets who gave the law and becomes so consumed with the law that they end up making this a works-based relationship with God. They forget God. They become so consumed with checking off the list that they don't see the giver of the law. They don't see it. And so as we get in this moment and we understand what's happening here he is given grace. He's given a huge amount of grace. Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering instead of his son. You know, Abraham didn't put his son in the way. He didn't become consumed with the grace that God had given him and focused on that. He kept his focus, kept his faith in God. And then when he turned around, here was the substitute. Here was the time to worship. Would anybody in here would have said, hey, give me 5. Give me a 15-minute break. I just need a moment to get my heart rate down. And he went immediately over, took the substitution, and worshiped God. And Abraham called the name of that place Jehovah Jireh. The Lord provides. That's what that means. The Lord provides. As it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it shall be seen. And the angel of the Lord called unto Abraham out of heaven the second time and said, by myself have I sworn, saith the Lord, for because thou hast done this thing, and hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, that in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore, and thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. What's that looking forward to? Jesus. Because thou hast obeyed my voice. Here we have a picture of what is to come. Yeah, Abraham, he's got faith here, but he's messed up, so he needs something better. And yet, in that moment, just get the picture of that in your mind, okay? So what do we deserve because of our sin? When we oppose God, when we're enemies of God, what are the wages of our sin? It's death. So here we are. We are laid out on the altar, about to be taken. Get the picture. The punishment coming down. The judgment about to be made, and Jesus steps in. Hold on. I've taken your place. I'll be your sacrifice. Man, isn't that beautiful? I'll take your place. I will take the judgment upon me. And even how deep is your love? That song that we were singing earlier, how awesome your love. And how he took upon himself the wrath of God because there had to be judgment. There had to be judgment upon our sin because God is a holy, righteous God, and there is that expectation. If there wasn't, then he isn't a holy, righteous God. He isn't the perfect judge. And so somebody has to take the hit. And in that moment, in that promise that has been given to Abraham, this angel of the Lord stepping in and saying, listen, all the families of the earth will be blessed because you have obeyed. That is Jesus who is to come to be that perfect substitution for us. So what are we doing about that? Listen, just like this morning as I presented, listen, what has been done in the past is that substitution, is that sacrifice, offering salvation for us. And so we have the opportunity, as this salvation has been offered to all mankind, we have the opportunity to take it, to put our faith in this salvation. And if that is you here tonight, be thankful and respond in faith. If you've never responded in faith, if you've never accepted that substitution, no, I'm going to toss Jesus' sacrifice off to the side. Not today. I don't have time. I've got things to handle. I want to do things before I give my life over to him. I've got things on my plate here that I've got to manage. No. Jesus stepped into your place so that you could have salvation. Respond in faith. Understanding that he is the way, the truth, and the life, and no man comes unto the Father but by him. Respond in faith. Accept that. Live your life for God. But if you've already put your faith in him, where is your faith here tonight? As that faith continues, are you just, 27 years ago, 17 years ago, 57 years ago, I got saved. That's when I put my faith in him. And really not much has happened since then. Where's your faith? Do you have this faith like Abraham that says, you know what? No matter what happens in this crazy world, no matter what happens, I'm going to put my faith in him. No matter what test comes up, I'm not going to be so consumed by the grace and get so distracted that it becomes almost like an idol. I want to keep my focus in God and keep putting my faith in him, and I'm going to keep trusting in him for my everyday walk. This is the question that we've got to be able to face here tonight. And it's in the big things like what Abraham's faced, but it's also in the little things. I told you I'd give you a little story of what happened this afternoon. You remember when I told you be thankful for the rain this morning? God put me to the test. We got done eating at a local restaurant, and I needed to get gas because I'm one of those guys that waits till it's like on the E of the E. Because gas is expensive, and yeah, you know how that works. Something in my head. I just wait to the E to the E. So I pulled into the gas station. I put the pump in my truck, and I get in my truck, and there's no rain whatsoever. I mean, it's just calm. And I'm sitting there waiting because my truck has like 30,000 gallons that I got to fill in there. At least that's the way it feels like. Anybody feel like that nowadays? And then all of a sudden, this downpour just comes on. And I mean, I felt like it was a monsoon. I thought I was in a hurricane. It's like, what in the world? And you know what? Usually my truck stops on 100 because usually you have to, they'll stop you on 100, but this gas station stopped me on 80. And I'm like, for crying out loud, give me some more time in my truck. I mean, I'll pay the extra $20 just to get some more gas and not have to go out in this rain. I had a white shirt on. And in my head, I'm saying, God, you have some humor. I was just telling people to thank God for the rain. And I just laughed. He gave me a little joke for this. He gave me a little test. Am I really going to thank him in everything? Am I going to give thanks in everything? So I just embraced the monsoon, got out of my truck, and I was out there for 5 seconds. I mean, literally, probably less than that. I was like Speedy Gonzalez. I didn't know I could move that fast, but I got it, in the pump, and I got the cap on, and I jumped back in my truck. I was absolutely soaked. I called Keely, put it on FaceTime, trying to get a little bit of, a sob story so she could feel bad for me, right? We've been married for 10 years, so that doesn't happen, okay? I said, Keely, look at me. I'm soaking wet. I have a white. I'm supposed to be going to Walmart to get some supplies for the game tonight, and I can't go anywhere right now. I mean, my hair is like just soaked, and I'm dripping everywhere all over the floor. And she just smiles at me. That's marriage for you, folks. You know, but I just had to be reminded of that moment. Sometimes we have those tests of faith that God is good in the big things, but also some of the things where God just kind of puts our thankfulness to the test. I don't know if you've been there today. We're probably there every single day, putting our thankfulness to the test. Are we going to thank Him for everything? Are we going to thank Him for the monsoon? Are we going to thank Him for the snow? Are we going to thank Him for, somebody came up to me after the service and said, have you been thanking God for the snow lately? I said, is it supposed to snow this week? She says, no, but I just wanted to see. But isn't that all of us? What are we the quickest to do? God, I will praise you in the storm. Or God, what are you doing? God, you've got this. Or God, I think I got a better plan. Where is our faith? And the big things and the little things. And I love this little wrap up in verse 19. So Abraham returned unto his young men and rose up and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham dwelt at Beersheba. Which is a nice little end. He returned. His faith in that statement. I wonder what kind of story that they had to tell. I wonder who got the glory. I wonder if Isaac was like the first one to say, you know what, my dad was going to kill me. He had the knife up and everything. And all of a sudden, the angel of the Lord showed up out of nowhere and said, stop. You proved yourself. You passed the test. You have faith. You haven't been consumed with the grace that God's given you to the point where you've forgotten God. You still put your faith in God. And this is what happened. And all of a sudden we looked over and there was a substitute. I got off the altar as fast as possible, guys. I helped him get that ram up onto the altar, and we took care of that. I mean, if I was him, I'd be stoked. I'd be telling a story. Guys, let's talk through this again tomorrow, okay? I want to tell you again. I'm going to tell you what God has done in my life. Listen, this is what we need to be doing to those that are around us. When we go into the workplace, when we go into Walmart, when we go into Taylorville City Council meetings, when we go into whatever it might be at the YMCA soccer games, wherever it is, let me tell you about how God is showing himself big in my life. What kind of story do you have? See, if we're complaining all day long and forgetting to give thanks, we really don't have much of a story, do we? We don't have much to say. Except, can you believe what he said on the news? Can you believe? Come on. Do you know what my kid did to me today? And we're just always grumbling and complaining. You know what the Israelites, you know what happened to them in the Old Testament when that was their thing? Man, if grumbling and complaining was a sport, they were the winners. All kinds of things happen. And God would remind them who to look to, who to give thanks for, who to praise, who to worship. So what kind of story do you have to tell people?